In chapter 214, both Draken and South faced each other off, and just when they were about to scrap, they were interrupted by police sirens on their way and thus had to call it off. But what would happen if that had never happened? What would happen had Draken and South faced each other off that day? How's it going, everyone? It's your host, Andrew Shots here, and today we'll be going over Draken versus South. I've been seeing this versus battle debate on social media a lot, and apparently this is a popular matchup within the fandom. Before we begin, I just want to let you guys know that this video will contain spoilers from the manga, as I'll be going over a manga exclusive character as of now, and if you're an only watcher, I suggest clicking off the video to avoid further spoilers. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Now before going to the juicy bit, I would have to scale them, and the person I'll be going over first is Ken Ryukiji, nicknamed Draken. Draken was the vice president of Toman and the right hand man of the invincible Mikey. To start off, during Toman's brawl against Valhalla, when Draken went on the offensive side, he along with other Toman members were able to break through Valhalla forces and steamroll his way through so he could finally get to the quote-unquote leader Hanma. Speaking of Hanma, even when he guarded himself, Draken launched him a good 5 or so meters away and then went ahead and started throwing hands with them. Draken did have the upper hand and was winning his whole altercation with Hanma. One of his most famous feats is him single-handedly defeating 100 Black Dragon gang members all on his own. To add just how impressive that feat was, the 10th generation Black Dragons were stated to be a totally different compared to the 9th generation, and Inoue stated that the 10th generation Black Dragons were more refined than ever, and Draken defeated them without much difficulty. His durability isn't too shabby either, as before Toman's brawl against Mobius, Payon confronted Draken and thinking both Draken and Mikey had abandoned Pechon. Caught off guard, a Mobius gang member managed to sneak behind Draken and landed a direct blow to his head with a baseball bat. Despite that, Draken still pulled through and still managed to take down 15 Mobius members before exhausting himself. Narratively, Draken is supposed to be the strongest person in Toman after Mikey, as has been hinted multiple times throughout the course of the series, given that he is the right hand man of Mikey. Now switching over to South, during his time in Juvie, he easily defeated the worst generation members, which included Mucho, Mochizuki, Madarame, and both the Hatani brothers. After he left Juvie, he went ahead and fought Kakucho until he gave in and joined his gang. And notice how Kakucho is all bloodied up compared to South, not having a single bruise mark. For those of you that don't know, South left Juvie and formed the Rokuhara gang a year before the main timeline, or when Mikey sent Takamichi back to the past. Around this time, the Sengoku period was still going about. Whereas essentially after the Tokyo Maji gang disbanded, a bunch of gangs rose up and claimed to be the next powerhouse in Tokyo, and soon would unfold into a chaotic period. Despite that, South and his gang brushed past all the difficulties and eventually became known as the Three Deities after destroying most of the competition around them, leaving only the Kanto Maji gang and Brahmin being the only two gangs left in Tokyo. During the brawl of the Three Deities, South faced both Waka and Benkei. For a brief background, prior to the current timeline, the Kanto region used to be divided into two parts. Benkei controlled the west with a total of 600 gang members, and the east was controlled by Waka. Benkei had a reputation of always leaving the aftermath of a battle soaked in blood, while in Waka's case, the united 12 gangs into one singular gang, becoming the leader of it all. Eventually, the east and west would unite and become one gang thanks with the help of Sanaro Shinichiro, Mikey's older brother and the first generation of Black Dragons. Waka and Benkei were stated by Akashi to be the strongest brawlers he knew, and they defeated 50 Rokuhara gang members each before reaching South. Despite South dominating them at the beginning without having a single mark on them, compared to Waka and Benkei who were all wounded up. They eventually managed to have a breakthrough, with Waka inflicted a couple blows and Benkei sending South flying 2 meters away. However, the moment South's dark urges kicked in, South destroyed them both almost immediately. Straight after, he fought with Senju, and after he sent Senju flying with his first punch. Senju would get back up and I guess awaken her quote-unquote deity form, seeing the aura around her, and began dodging and countering all of South's attacks. This would transpire for South's dark urges to kick in again, as we could see his aura circulating around him, indicating his dark urges were kicking in, making him faster and stronger until he finally managed to land a second blow against her, which would put her out of commission for the rest of the brawl. After all of that, immediately went up against the Dark Impulse's bloodlusted Mikey, and will leave with both of them having a battle to the death. Even though South lost, he still managed to damage Mikey and arguably fought the strongest version of Mikey up to date. Now, after going over all of that, had South's fight against Draken not been interrupted, in my opinion, it would have been completely one-sided, and no, it would not have looked pretty for Draken. Now, before spamming hate comments in the comment section, hear me out. In a flashback, we see a pre-time skip Mikey severely injuring Draken, Mitsuya, Kafuyu, and Payon without receiving any damage, compared to his fight with South, where a bloodlusted version post-time skip Mikey received a decent amount of damage from his fight with South. Now, the few arguments I hear some people bring up to place more in favor with Draken Draken is that A, Draken fought against Self multiple times when he attempted to recruit him in the past, and therefore is around if not an equal to him, and B, Mikey hasn't gotten any stronger at all, and fundamentally Self fought against the same version of Mikey as Draken did before the time skip. Now the first one is pretty reasonable and a compelling argument, but there's a few issues with this claim. First is that it wasn't mentioned by anybody that both Self and Draken scrapped with each other a few times in the past. The reason why some people determine this claim is because Self did resort to violence to recruit the First Generation members and Kakacho as well, which again is a fair assumption. But saying Draken fended off Self on a few occasions in the past is just a stretch. Heck, there is even more of an argument that if Self did indeed engage Draken during this time, Self most likely defeated him instead of Draken just fended him off. Now before you start getting mad at me, hear me out. Self is the type of character that would never back down from a fight, and if he were to be under pressure, that would only excite him and would further continue to get amped / stronger than before as previously shown. For instance, he's like Taiju Shiba, where he would use dirty tricks to end a fight quickly, and in fact would be more condemned for someone not interrupting his fight, and indicating that Self called it a day after throwing a hands with Draken is something out of character. We saw an example of this when Wakam Benkei landed a couple blows and punched Self a good distance away. Self immediately brought himself up, and at that moment his dark urges kicked in, and he went ahead and destroyed them both. Even in his fight with Senju was dodging and countering all of Self's attacks, and this only excited Self, saying that he never experienced such a quote-unquote beat before and wanted the fight to continue on, and this factor would be repeated again with Sano. The point is that Self's whole philosophy is him endorsing violence, and saying that he got exhausted with allegedly fighting Draken in the past is again out of character, and instead will actually excite Self and will only motivate him more to continue fighting. So in Self's alleged past encounterments with Draken, Self more than likely defeated Draken in a fight, but unlike the Worst Generation and Kakacho, Draken was probably much more stubborn, and unlike the others who would follow whoever they thought was the strongest, Draken doesn't have this sort of ambition and is more motivated in bringing his friend back instead of being part of a gang that will rule over Tokyo. So because Draken more than likely didn't give in to Self's demands, no matter how badly he was beaten, and since Self didn't want to kill him as he wanted Draken to be part of his gang, he decided to let him go and thought Draken would eventually give in. This could be supported by during Self's last reunion with Draken, Self was basically unfazed when he heard Draken refused his offer to join him, but reacted when Draken said he quote-unquote retired. Even when Self went about with Draken, Self didn't mention the fact why Draken wasn't fighting back, or why he wasn't trying, as this more than likely already happened similarly in the past, and this is how Self usually dealt with Draken when they fought each other in the past. Allegedly. Except during this occasion, Self finally lost his patience with Draken and forced Draken to make a decision to either die or join his gang. Also notice how Draken will only make his move when Self threatened Takamichi, as he respected and owed a great deal to Takamichi, as he'd rather face Self than have Takamichi deal with him. Now the second one, where people are claiming that Self fought the same version of Mikey as Draken did and saying that Mikey hasn't gotten any stronger, is just pure nonsense. It's actually ridiculous to think pre-time skip Mikey was exactly as strong as this post-time skip version. As in the story, we see all the characters getting progressively stronger as the story progresses, and that same logic could easily be applied to Mikey. If you don't believe me, here's an example. Hama fought against Mikey and held him off until he was the last Mobius gang member standing. If you notice, they both received damage, implicating that they both went at each other. Ignoring the fact that Hama was one-shotted by a bloodlusted Mikey in the Fallen Arc, this is the same Hama that fought and held his own against Draken on two separate occasions, once during the Valhalla arc and the other after the Tenjiku gang, and Mikey annihilated Draken along with Mitsuya, Kafuya, and Peion all at the same time without a single mark on him. Mind you, this isn't Dark Impulse's Mikey, nor a bloodlusted version of him, but his regular self. Just to add, this wasn't long after Tomen's victory over the Tenjiku gang, as this happened just before the time skip in Tokyo Revengers. Also, if you want to make the argument that Mikey was holding back against Hanma, here's my counter argument to that. Why? When Mikey saw his best friend stabbed, we could see him trying to desperately reach him before Hanma intervened and threw him across. Given the reaction to Mikey's face and what the narrative is trying to imply, you can easily interpret that this wasn't going to be easy for Mikey. That is why only then he told Takamichi to take care of Draken for him, because he knew he wouldn't reach him in time because he had to deal with Hanma. Why would Mikey risk his closest friend potentially dying in front of him just to have a slap and a tickle with Hanma? Had Mikey thought this was going to be easy or he was holding back, he would have just one-shotted him and called it a day. But he didn't because he couldn't, and therefore implying he wasn't holding back, unless he was bloodlusted, which he wasn't at the time. So saying Mikey hasn't gotten any stronger since the time time skip is counterintuitive and contradicts to what the narrative is trying to imply. And instead, Mikey has gotten substantially stronger, and Self fought against and damaged the strongest version of Mikey with dark impulses, and Draken, along with the other top dogs in Toman, lost against a weaker pre-time skip Mikey with no dark impulses and inflicted 0 damage to him. Also, another thing to add is that it was mentioned that both Self and Senju are quote-unquote equal to Mikey. Now, if you read the story, you would know this isn't exactly true, but most likely meant for only in a prestige position and status instead of equal strength. Draken was never narratively implied to be anywhere near this category. As I said earlier in the video, Draken was second only to Mikey, and that was narratively implied quite a few times in the story, but that notion only goes from in Toman and not the verse as a whole. Remember what I said earlier in the video that during Self's fight against Senju, he said something along the lines that he never felt the quote-unquote beat that he was currently experiencing at that moment with his fight against Senju. So even with his fight with everyone he had before, he never experienced a similar beat in the past before. So if you want to say that Self did indeed fought Draken in the past, Draken had never driven him to the same level of beat where Senju took him. Also, the scene where Draken sent Self flying, if you pay close attention, Self was talking and looking directly at Takemichi. The moment before Draken landed his one and only blow against him, Self managed to guard himself and block Draken's attack. Despite being caught off guard, in actuality makes Draken look bad, as this was quote-unquote normal Self before he even kicked in his dark urges, and we know that Self will get stronger as the story progresses further down the line. Also, when Self landed a few blows toward Draken, Draken was on the floor for a good while, and this trend continued until the following chapter. So it's not like Draken immediately got back up and went after Self. Granted, Draken did sort of let Self punch him, but it doesn't take away the fact that Self landed 3 blows toward Draken, and he was on the floor for a good while for him to recoup and have another go at Self. Another thing, some people tend to be under the illusion that Draken has gotten weaker since his pre-time skip Self because he quote-unquote retired, which is just false. When it was indicating that Draken did have a run-in with either Self or the other Rokuhara gang members, nowhere did he mention that he quote-unquote retired. It was only after his last run-in with Self, Draken mentioned that he quote-unquote retired, and that was news to Self, given his reaction, which basically proves that Draken didn't retire before, or else Self wouldn't be so shocked. However, we know that this isn't true, as a couple of chapters later, we find out that Draken was either an unofficial or official member of Brahmin. Draken only said this to get Self out of his back and stop attempting to recruit him. Also, quite the opposite actually. There's more of a compelling argument that Draken has gone stronger since his pre-time skip Self. Draken's main goal during or even after the time skip was to save Mikey. In order for him to do that, he has to get stronger. For example, when Mikey drove him and the other Toman members away, Mikey beat the living crap out of the former members without receiving any damage, while the others looked all battered up. So Draken knows full well that sitting home all day wasn't going to make him any stronger, so training or getting himself stronger was the most obvious chance to get Mikey back. Also, even in the story, we see Draken getting progressively stronger as the story goes along. So the idea that Draken has gone weaker is just false and easily debunkable. If I had to place Draken in a category, he'd be in a spot below Self and would hang around people like Kakucho, Waka, and Benkei, not in that particular order. Remember, during the Tenjiku arc, Izana was narratively implied to be around, if not the same level as Mikey at the time. Kakucho is Izana's right-hand man, and Draken was Mikey's right-hand man. So you could interpret that the two should at least be around the same level. Same with Waka and Benkei. Waka and Benkei were implied to be around each other's level, as their whole selling point is their teamwork, and Benkei tanked a blow from Kakucho and got up just fine. As I mentioned earlier, Self easily defeated Kakucho without having a single mark or even a scratch on him, and both Waka and Benkei had to use their teamwork to eventually have a breakthrough and damage Self. I'm probably not giving Draken enough credit here, but I'm honestly cannot see Draken in any scenario could defeat Self. Don't get me wrong, the moment Draken sent Self flying was a cool moment at the time, but when taking a closer look at it, it probably would have been the only time he sent him flying. In all honesty, I find Izana versus Self to be more of an interesting matchup than I do with Draken, which I'll be covering soon. Well, anyways guys, that's all I have for today's video, and if you'd like to see more future Tokyo Revengers content, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.